The flames devoured my engineering diploma as my father's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Each ember that floated away carried 4 years of perfect grades, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. My skin prickled with a strange heat that had nothing to do with the fire, as the shocked faces of extended family members watched from our backyard graduation party. "Your sister needs that inheritance more than you do," my father spat, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "She has dreams, ambitions." Behind him, my sister Laura's mouth curved into the same smirk she'd worn since we were children, the one that appeared whenever she got her way at my expense. My mother stood beside her, nodding in agreement, her practiced look of disappointment firmly in place. "My name is Nicole. I'm 22, and yesterday I was a proud engineering graduate. This is the story of how I reclaim my family legacy from the people who tried to burn it away. I worked for this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The inheritance money wasn't just cash, it was validation of the relationship I'd built with my grandfather, the only person who had ever truly seen me. "Grandpa left that money to me for a reason." "Your sister's art gallery won't fund itself," Mom chimed in, as if Laura's latest whim somehow outweighed my grandfather's final wishes. "You already have a job lined up. You don't need the inheritance." I looked around at our gathered family members. Most avoided eye contact, some recorded the drama on their phones. Only my grandfather's sister, Aunt Beatrice, met my gaze with a knowing look. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd spent 4 years earning my degree with a 4.0 GPA and securing a position at a prestigious engineering firm, Laura had bounced between 5 different passions. Art gallery owner was just her latest dream, right after failed attempts at becoming a yoga instructor, social media influencer, professional organizer, and lifestyle coach. "The inheritance is mine," I stated firmly. "Grandpa specifically left it to me in his will." Dad stepped closer, the ashes of my diploma scattered at his feet. His breath smelled of the expensive scotch he'd been drinking all afternoon. "We're your parents. We know what's best. Sign the papers transferring the inheritance to Laura, or you're no longer part of this family." I thought about my grandfather's last words to me, spoken in the quiet of his hospital room 3 months ago. "Stay sharp, little fox," he'd said, using his old nickname for me. "Watch everything carefully. You'll know when to strike." At the time, I hadn't understood what he meant. Now, watching my father's face turn purple with rage, my mother's practiced look of disappointment, and Laura's poorly concealed greed, it all made sense. "No," I said simply. The strike came fast, my father's hand connecting with my cheek before anyone could react. The party guests gasped. Someone dropped a glass. My mother covered her mouth in fake shock, while Laura's smirk grew wider. "Then get out," Dad spat. "You're no daughter of mine." I touched my stinging cheek, then smiled. They all stepped back, unsettled by my calm reaction. "Okay," I said, turning to leave. "See you at the lawyer's office next week." "What lawyer's office?" Laura's voice cracked slightly, her smirk faltering. I didn't answer, just walked away as my father shouted threats behind me. Aunt Beatrice caught up with me at my car. "You knew this would happen," she said. Not a question, but a statement. I nodded, opening my car door. "Grandpa warned me, said they'd show their true colors once the inheritance deadline got close." She smiled, patting my arm. "Jack always said you were the sharp one. Did you get everything documented?" I gestured to my cousin Patrick, who was walking toward us holding his phone. "Got it all on video," he confirmed. "The threats, the diploma burning, the strike, everything." Aunt Beatrice's eyes sparkled. "They have no idea what's coming, do they?" I started my car thinking about the meeting scheduled for next week, about the real will, the one my parents hadn't seen yet, about my grandfather's careful planning and the lessons he taught me about patience and timing. "No," I replied. "They don't." "Come stay with me tonight," Aunt Beatrice offered. "You shouldn't be alone after all this, and we can review the documents together." That night, I stayed at Aunt Beatrice's house. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives. Some condemned my selfishness. Others expressed shock at my father's behavior. Laura sent a series of taunting texts about how she'd redecorate my childhood bedroom once I was gone. I ignored them all, instead reviewing the documents my grandfather had left with his lawyer. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was controlling interest in the family company, the house my parents lived in, and several other properties. My parents had only seen the preliminary will, the one that mentioned a simple trust fund. They had no idea that my grandfather, tired of watching them favor Laura while dismissing my achievements, had spent his final years restructuring everything. Sometimes, he told me, people need to lose everything to appreciate what they had. As I prepared for bed, Aunt Beatrice brought me some tea. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. "He always said you have his spirit, the patience to wait for the right moment." I thought about the family meeting scheduled for next week, where the full will would be read, about my father's face when he realized what his actions today had cost him, about my mother's practiced disappointment crumbling when she learned that her comfortable lifestyle depended entirely on my goodwill. Mostly, I thought about Laura, who had spent years watching our parents undermine and dismiss me, believing she would always come out on top. "The right moment," I agreed, sipping my tea. "That's exactly what Grandpa taught me to wait for." The week before the family meeting crawled by in a blur of angry calls and manipulative texts. My father's threats escalated from disownment to legal action, though he never specified what laws I'd broken by refusing to give away my inheritance. My mother alternated between guilt trips and promises, suggesting we could compromise by me giving Laura just 80% of everything. Laura predictably had already started advertising her upcoming art gallery on social media, complete with photos of the building she planned to acquire with her inheritance. The building that, ironically, was one of the properties Grandpa had left to me. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early at the law offices of Farrell and Associates. Mr. Farrell, my grandfather's lawyer for 30 years, greeted me with a knowing smile. "Everything's prepared," he said, patting a thick folder on his desk. "Your grandfather would have loved this moment. He always said revenge is best served with paperwork." I smiled, remembering Grandpa's lessons about patience and documentation. "Are the security cameras installed, both in here and the lobby?" He confirmed, period. "Given your father's recent behavior, we thought it best to have everything recorded. I had them installed yesterday after our phone call." My family arrived in waves. First came the curious cousins and distant relatives, then Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Samuel, who gave me supportive nods. Finally, my parents swept in, Laura trailing behind them like a smug shadow. "This is unnecessary," my father announced to the room. "We can handle family matters privately." "Like you handled things at Nicole's graduation party?" Aunt Beatrice's voice cut through the tension. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, no doubt remembering the viral videos of my father's outburst. Mr. Farrell cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" My father tried to object, but the lawyer had already started reading. The first few items were standard: small bequests to various relatives, donations to charities. Then came the part they'd been waiting for. Regarding the primary estate, including Randall Manufacturing, all associated properties, and liquid assets, Mr. Farrell paused, looking directly at my parents. Jack Randall left detailed instructions about their distribution. My mother straightened in her chair. Laura pulled out her phone, probably ready to post about her windfall. My father smiled smugly. "The entire estate," Mr. Farrell continued, "is left to Nicole Randall, with specific conditions regarding its management and distribution." The room went silent, then everything exploded. "This is impossible!" my father shouted, jumping to his feet. "We saw the will months ago. It was just a trust fund." "That was a preliminary document," Mr. Farrell explained calmly. "This is the final version, properly witnessed and notarized 3 months before Mr. Randall's death." Laura's phone clattered to the floor. "But my gallery—" "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, raising his voice slightly, "the current residence occupied by Garrett and Melissa Randall is included in this estate. The occupants have 30 days to either purchase the property at market value or vacate." My mother's practiced composure cracked. "Vacate? But that's our home." Actually, I spoke for the first time. It's my home. Grandpa left it to me along with everything else you tried to bully me into giving away. You planned this, my father snarled, taking a threatening step toward me. You manipulated your grandfather. Mr. Randall, Mr. Farrell interrupted sharply, I remind you that this meeting is being recorded, and given your recent documented history of violence toward your daughter, any aggressive moves will have consequences. My father froze, finally noticing the security cameras. Additionally, the lawyer continued, Mr. Randall left a video message explaining his decisions. Shall we watch it? Before anyone could respond, my grandfather's face appeared on the conference room screen. He looked tired but determined, his familiar sharp eyes staring directly into the camera. If you're watching this, he began, then Nicole has finally stood up to you all, just as I taught her to. I've watched for years as you dismissed her achievements, belittled her efforts, and favored Laura despite her lack of direction or responsibility. Laura started to protest, but Aunt Beatrice shushed her. I built this company from nothing. Grandpa's recording continued. I know the value of hard work, dedication, and patience. Nicole has all these qualities. She also has something else, the wisdom to wait for the right moment to show her strength. That's why she gets everything, not because she's my favorite, but because she's earned it. My mother was crying now, whether from genuine emotion or practiced manipulation, I couldn't tell. My father had slumped in his chair, his face ashen. Laura just stared at her fallen phone, her dreams of an easy payday crumbling around her. There's more, Mr. Farrell said as the video ended. Shall we continue? I nodded, thinking about Grandpa's words about patience and timing. The real surprise was still to come, the part where they'd learn exactly what kind of leader I planned to be. Yes, I said, pulling out my own folder of documents. Let's talk about the future of Randall Manufacturing. I have some changes in mind. The room felt charged with tension as I opened my folder. Inside were the plans I'd spent months developing, guided by Grandpa's mentorship during his final days. Randall Manufacturing needs restructuring, I announced. My engineering degree might be ashes, but my knowledge wasn't burned away. Our technology is outdated, our processes inefficient, and our employee satisfaction is at an all-time low. You can't just walk in and change everything, my father exploded. I've run this company for 20 years. Into the ground, I replied calmly, sliding quarterly reports across the table. We've lost market share every year for the past 5 years. Employee turnover is at 60%. 3 major clients have already given notice they won't renew their contracts. Aunt Beatrice picked up one of the reports, nodding slowly. Jack tried to tell you this, Garrett. You wouldn't listen. Where did you get these reports? My father demanded. Grandpa shared them with me during our weekly meetings at the company, I replied. He was grooming me to take over while you were busy ignoring the problems. The first change, I continued, involves the executive board. Effective immediately, I'm appointing new directors with actual industry experience, not just family connections. My father's face reddened. He'd packed the board with golf buddies and Laura's ex-boyfriends for years. Second, we're implementing the employee profit-sharing program Grandpa designed before you shelved it. Every worker gets a stake in our success. You'll bankrupt us, my mother cried, but Mr. Farrell was already distributing the financial projections. Actually, he interjected, these plans could double profitability within 18 months. I turned to Laura, who hadn't spoken since the initial shock. You wanted an art gallery? Fine. The company's starting an art therapy program for employees and their families. You can run it if you complete a proper business plan and get relevant certifications. For the first time in her life, Laura looked at me with something other than contempt. You're giving me a chance? I'm giving you an opportunity to earn something, I corrected. That's more than you gave me. My father stood up again, but this time his anger had a desperate edge. You can't do this. I won't let you destroy my legacy. Your legacy? I laughed softly. Dad, look around. You're sitting in a dying company, in an office you don't own anymore, threatening the person who controls your future. What exactly is your legacy? The truth finally seemed to hit him. He sank back into his chair, decades of arrogance crumbling under the weight of reality. "Now," I said, pulling out one final document, "let's discuss your roles moving forward." My mother perked up, probably expecting a generous settlement. Instead, I handed them each a contract. "You can stay with the company under my leadership, starting in entry-level positions. Learn the business from the ground up, like Grandpa did. Like I did during summer internships while Laura was traveling through Europe on your dime." "Entry level?" my mother whispered, horrified. "But our lifestyle will need adjustment," I finished. "The company mansion needs to be sold to fund the modernization project. You have 3 options. Take the jobs I'm offering, buy the house at market value, or start packing." The silence that followed was deafening. Around the table, relatives watched with varying degrees of shock and satisfaction. Aunt Beatrice didn't bother hiding her smile. "I'll do it," Laura suddenly said. Everyone turned to stare at her. "The art therapy program. I'll get the certifications, make a business plan. I want to earn it." I nodded, seeing a glimmer of something new in my sister's eyes. Maybe understanding, maybe respect, or maybe just the first real motivation she'd ever shown. "Time to decide," I announced, standing up. "You have until the end of the week. After that, the positions go to qualified outside candidates." As people filed out of the conference room, Aunt Beatrice stayed behind. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, hugging me. "You showed them mercy without weakness." "He taught me well," I replied. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's giving people a chance to face their own failures and grow from them." 3 months later, Randall Manufacturing was transforming. My father, swallowing his pride, took the offered position in quality control. He discovered he actually enjoyed working with his hands again, like when he first started under Grandpa. My mother declined employment but found a smaller house within her new budget. She's learning to live without household staff, which Aunt Beatrice calls character building. Laura surprised everyone. She completed her business certification in record time, submitted a detailed proposal for the art therapy program, and now works harder than she ever has. Last week, she actually thanked me for not giving her the easy way out. The company is thriving. Employee morale has soared since implementing the profit-sharing program. Our technological upgrades have attracted new clients, and our stock price has jumped 30%. Sometimes, during quiet moments in what used to be my father's office, I look at the photo of Grandpa on my desk. "Stay sharp, little fox," he said. He taught me that true leadership isn't about power or control. It's about vision, patience, and the wisdom to know when to strike and when to show mercy. I kept the diploma ashes in a small box on my shelf, not as a reminder of that day's pain, but as a symbol of how destruction can lead to rebirth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles. 0 cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one. My eyes burned as I stared at my father's text message, the glow of my phone illuminating the small pile of carefully wrapped Christmas presents on my bed. Those 5 words hit harder than any IED I'd encountered overseas. "Christmas is better without you." The room seemed to tilt sideways. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly, not from anger, but from the sudden hollow feeling expanding in my chest. 3 years of deployed holidays, of missed birthdays and graduations, of telling myself that family would be there when the service ended. All of it collapsed into this single digital rejection. Outside my apartment window, Christmas lights blinked cheerfully along the street. I typed back a single word. Understood. Military precise. Emotion-free. The soldier's response to an order, even one that shattered everything. My name is Olivia. I'm 31 and a former Army specialist. This is the story of how I discovered what family truly means when mine tried to erase me. I'd imagined this homecoming for years, The first Christmas without sand in my boots, or the constant vigilance that had become my second skin. My duffel bag sat half-packed in the corner, containing small gifts I'd collected during my final tour. A hand-carved music box for Mom, vintage fishing lures for Dad, and custom onesies for my niece and nephew I'd never met. Grandpa Thomas had been my lifeline during deployment, sending me packages labeled, "For when the world feels too small," and handwritten letters that smelled like his pipe tobacco. They contained updates my parents never bothered to share. When I video called him last month from my new apartment, he'd insisted I come home for Christmas. "The family needs to see who you've become," he'd said, voice gravelly but firm, "and you need to remember who you were before all this." We'd talked about my struggles readjusting to civilian life, the job interviews where military experience translated poorly, the nightmares that still woke me at 3 a.m., the loneliness of a world that moved on without me. He was the only one who listened without offering empty solutions. Now I sat in silence, my father's rejection burning through every defense I'd built. No explanation, no discussion, just banishment, 5 days before Christmas. I didn't cry, I didn't call. I just canceled my flight reservation, unpacked my bags, and spent December 25th alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and the distant sound of neighbors celebrating through thin walls. 2 days after Christmas, I woke to the urgent buzzing of my phone against the nightstand. Squinting at the screen, I saw a string of missed calls. 5 from Mom, 2 from my sister Regina, 1 from my brother Kyle, 1 from Dad, and 1 from an unfamiliar local number with my hometown area code. The voicemails began with my mother's tearful plea. "Olivia, please, I just found out what your father said to you. We didn't mean it like that. We need to talk. Something's happened." Regina's message was colder. "You not showing up has complicated everything. You're not the only one hurting. Call us back." Kyle sounded panicked. "Liv, you need to call Mom. It's about Grandpa. He passed on the 24th. The will... You were supposed to be here." My hand froze on the phone. Grandpa Thomas, gone on Christmas Eve, and they hadn't told me. The final voicemail came from the unknown number. "Miss Reynolds, this is Veronica Jackson, estate attorney for the late Thomas Reynolds. Please contact our office immediately regarding the execution of his final will and testament. Time sensitive. Thank you." The realization hit me like physical pain. They hadn't bothered to inform me that the one person who had maintained contact during my service had died. The only family member who sent me care packages, who remembered my birthday, who asked questions about my life instead of offering platitudes about serving our country. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands shaking with grief and something colder, understanding. This wasn't about Christmas at all. 2 years ago, during my brief leave between deployments, Grandpa Thomas had walked with me around his property, 40 acres of prime land that had been in our family for generations. It included the Victorian farmhouse where my father grew up. We'd stopped by the pond where I'd learned to fish, and he'd grown unusually serious. "If anything happens to me," he'd said, "don't let them take what's yours. I've made sure you're not forgotten, even if they pretend you don't exist." I'd laughed it off then as an old man's paranoia. Now it seemed prophetic. I called the law office immediately. The attorney confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. I was named as the primary beneficiary of Grandpa Thomas's estate, his house, land, investments, and shares in the small regional brewery he'd helped found. Everything. But there was a condition. I had to attend the formal will reading in person on January 3rd. If I failed to appear, the estate would be contested, and everything would default to the next of kin, my father. "Did Grandpa know about how they treated me?" I asked the attorney. There was a pause on the line. "Yes. That's why he changed the will 6 months ago. And that's why he insisted the will reading be recorded, to prevent them from pressuring you." The pieces clicked into place with military precision. My father's text wasn't about Christmas traditions or family harmony. It was about ensuring I wouldn't be present for the will reading. The sudden flood of messages wasn't concern for my well-being. It was panic over losing their expected windfall. I wasn't their daughter. I was an obstacle. I booked a flight that afternoon, not as the forgotten soldier seeking reconciliation, but as the heir they never wanted and the storm they never saw coming. The will reading was scheduled for 10 a.m. on January 3rd at Jackson Legal Services, an imposing brick building near the town square. I arrived in my hometown the evening before but stayed at a hotel on the outskirts. I didn't announce my presence. I didn't visit my childhood home. I didn't even drive past the cemetery. They had wanted my absence. I would give them exactly that until the moment it mattered most. At 9:59 a.m., I walked through the polished oak doors of the law office. I wore a pressed navy blazer, dark jeans, and the same boots that had carried me through 3 tours, still bearing the faint traces of foreign soil. My hair was pulled back in a tight bun, military precise. The receptionist nodded and directed me to the conference room. My entire family turned as one when I entered. Dad, red-eyed and rigid in his wrinkled suit. Mom, fingers white-knuckled around her purse. Regina, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock. Kyle, unable to meet my eyes. "You actually came," Regina said, breaking the silence. I took a seat directly across from them, placing a folder on the mahogany table. "Didn't want to disappoint Grandpa," I replied evenly. "He made it clear I needed to be here in person." Ms. Jackson entered precisely at 10 a.m., cutting off any further conversation. She placed a small recorder on the table and pressed play without preamble. Grandpa Thomas's voice filled the room, steady and clear despite his age. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. And if Olivia is in the room, thank you, kid. I knew you'd come." My mother's head bowed slightly. Kyle stared at the table. My father's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. I want to begin by saying this. Olivia was the only one who reached out to me consistently without being asked. She never demanded anything. She never came with expectations. She came with love and respect, and for that, she gets everything. The silence in the room was absolute. The house, the land, the brewery, shares, the investment accounts, all of it goes to Olivia Reynolds. Grandpa's voice paused, then added, "If anyone contests this will, they forfeit any auxiliary bequests entirely. So think real hard before you do something stupid." Regina exploded first. "This is ridiculous. You barely even spoke to him this past year." I turned to her, maintaining the calm I'd perfected under mortar fire. "And whose fault is that? You didn't even tell me he died. You had time for baby showers and engagement parties, but not one text about the man who supported me when Dad threw me away." My father's eyes narrowed. "You think just because you put on a uniform, you're better than the rest of us?" I leaned forward slightly. "Number I think the fact that you told me not to come home for Christmas 5 days before Grandpa died says everything I need to know about who you really are." Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. "We didn't know what your father had said. He didn't tell us." "You didn't ask," I cut her off. "You never ask. You never call. I spent Christmas alone in my apartment while you all posted family photos online like I was already dead." Kyle finally spoke. "Olivia, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. We were going to talk to you after the holiday. Dad was just angry. I laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. "Angry. He told me Christmas was better without me, and you all went along with it. You don't get to rewrite history now that Grandpa left me something." Ms. Jackson cleared her throat. "Unless there are legal objections, the paperwork will be processed this week. Olivia, we'll need your signature here." I signed without hesitation. When I stood, my family remained seated, as if paralyzed by the reality of what had just happened. The daughter they had cast aside was now the legal owner of everything they had coveted. I walked to the door, paused, and turned back. "You didn't want me home. You got your wish, but now this isn't your home anymore." Outside, the January air hit my face like clarity. Sharp, clean, final. Over the next week, I met with financial advisors and property managers. Grandpa's investments were more substantial than anyone had realized. The brewery shares alone were worth enough to fund my business degree 3 times over. The house, my house now, was still occupied by my parents. They had 30 days to vacate. I had the property manager deliver the formal notice while I arranged my affairs in the city. There was no need for another confrontation. My father called once. I didn't answer. He left no message, just as he'd left no explanation for his Christmas rejection. Regina emailed, calling me selfish and vindictive. I forwarded her message to Ms. Jackson and blocked her number. Kyle called twice more, leaving apologetic voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as their move-out date approached. Kyle sent a lengthy apology text that I read but didn't respond to. "We were wrong," it said. "All of us. I should have stood up to Dad when he sent that message. I should have called you right away about Grandpa. I'm sorry." Mom appeared at the law office during my final signing appointment. She'd somehow learned I would be there from Ms. Jackson's secretary, who'd mentioned my scheduled visit when Mom called about retrieving personal items from the house. She didn't speak, just watched me from across the street. I walked past her without acknowledgement. For years, I'd made excuses for their silence, their favoritism, their absence. I blamed my military service, my independent nature, my failure to be the daughter they wanted. But that chapter is closed now. By February, they had vacated the property completely. The property manager confirmed they'd left the keys on the kitchen counter with a single envelope addressed to me. Inside was my childhood photo album and a note from my mother that simply read, "We failed you." I donated most of their abandoned furniture to veterans housing and stored the family heirlooms in the attic. I have a home, not because it was given freely, but because the one person who recognized my worth ensured I had the last word. I returned home to rejection, but left with something more powerful than forgiveness, the certainty that family isn't defined by blood, but by who stands by you when the world turns its back. They shut the door on me at Christmas, so I locked them out permanently. 3 years later, I still haven't spoken to any of them, though Kyle occasionally sends cards that I never answer. The brewery shares have tripled in value, and I've turned the farmhouse into a retreat for veterans struggling with civilian transition. Grandpa Thomas would have approved. The gravel scraped beneath my knees as I scrambled to stand, tiny stones embedding themselves under my skin. My father's hand clenched around my wrist, yanking me back before I could rise. The sun beat down mercilessly, but ice flooded my veins as I heard my sister Whitney's high-pitched laughter from behind her phone camera. "Don't you ever block your sister's car again?" he snarled, dragging me another few feet across the driveway like I was some useless piece of garbage. I hadn't even been blocking her. I just stepped out for a moment to grab my biochemistry textbook from the porch when she decided she needed to leave right that second. Her whine of, "Dad, she's in the way again," was all it took for him to erupt. "She wants to live here for free and take up space," my mother called from the porch, arms crossed, sipping her iced tea like she was watching a mildly interesting nature documentary. "That trash can's finally got some use." With a final violent jerk, my father shoved me straight into the bin. The lid flew open, then flapped shut behind me with a hollow bang. The stench of rotting food and damp paper engulfed me as I struggled awkwardly against the plastic walls, my body contorted at a painful angle. "Finally in a place that fits, huh?" Whitney's voice came through the plastic, followed by more laughter. "My name is Nora. I'm 25 and a biochemistry graduate. This is the story of how I transformed from family trash into the architect of their downfall. I had been staying at my parents' house for just a few weeks while saving for an apartment after graduation. Every application for entry-level research positions had led nowhere, leaving me with $93 in my account and nowhere else to go. But each day in that house felt like punishment for existing. My father used to be decent when I was younger, not loving but tolerable. Something shifted when Whitney turned 15. Suddenly, she became the star of everything. Private dance school, trips to France, designer clothes. When I needed new shoes for a lab internship, they said, "Your sister needs that money for a summer intensive." The neglect had gradually transformed into open hostility. After the trash incident, I locked myself in the basement room they'd reluctantly given me. The single light bulb buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, silent as rage coiled inside me like a spring being compressed beyond its limit. I didn't go up for dinner. Around 9 p.m., my mother knocked, not gently. "You going to stay down there and sulk, or are you going to clean up that trash you left all over the driveway?" I opened the door. Her face remained impassive as she looked me over, the ice in her glass clinking as she swirled it. "You know what you are," she said, tapping her long fingernail against the side of her drink. "You're a leech with a fake education. Whitney's building something real. You just stink up our space." She walked away before I could respond, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor above. The next morning, they were gone. A note on the refrigerator read, "Road trip with Whitney, gone for the week. Don't mess up the house." I could have used that week to leave, but where would I go? My one remaining friend in town, Rachel, didn't answer my call. Last time we'd spoken, my mother had humiliated her for bringing poor girl vibes to our porch. I didn't blame Rachel for avoiding me. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Whitney, a photo of my suitcase sitting at a curb. "Oops, took a detour. Hope you like the new view." I ran outside, heart hammering, but the suitcase was already gone. My phone buzzed again. My father. "We dropped your stuff off," he said flatly. "You'll find it at 91st Street Shelter in Ashland. Best start learning how the world works. Let's see how you survive." The call ended. I stood barefoot on the porch, chest caving in like it was collapsing under its own weight. Ashland was 300 miles away. They had left me in a house without my clothes, without my ID, without keys. They had taken everything. My laptop, my research notes, even my worn-out backpack. Thankfully, they'd missed my phone, which I'd kept hidden in my pocket while sleeping since their hostility escalated. All I could hear was my mother's voice echoing in my head. "You stink up our space." Something inside me changed in that moment. Not with rage, but with purpose. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood up straight and walked to the neighbors. Mrs. Lillian, an elderly woman who had always asked about my studies, opened her door with concern etched across her face when she saw my state. "Sweetheart, what happened to you?" I didn't lie. I told her everything. She listened without interruption, her eyes growing harder with each detail. "Well," she said when I finished, "I think it's about time someone taught them how survival actually works." She handed me $40 and the business card of her nephew, Felix, who ran a vintage restoration shop 2 towns over. "Call him. He owes me a favor. You're smarter than they'll ever be." I looked down at the card in my hand, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like trash. I felt like something was finally beginning. The next morning, Mrs. Lillian drove me to the bus station and paid for my ticket to Mapleton, where Felix's shop was located. Before I left, she took a quick photo of me with her phone, documenting the state they'd left me in, she said. I'd forgotten about this until much later. The first weeks at Felix's restoration shop were brutal. I swept sawdust until my back ached, sanded antique bedposts until my fingers bled, and hauled vintage armoires heavier than my body weight. But Felix never raised his voice or belittled my efforts. He watched, listened, and when I finally handed him the reupholstered bench I'd worked on for 2 days straight, he simply nodded. "You've got grit," he said, running his hand over the restored velvet, "and that's rarer than talent." He couldn't know what those words meant to me after years without hearing anything close to praise. I used the tiny stipend he gave me to buy a used burner phone and 1 change of clothes from a thrift store. I slept on a cot in the back room, kept my head down, and worked. Every night, I read design specs and wood staining techniques like my life depended on it, because it did. By the 3rd month, Felix handed me a client of my own, a wealthy widow who wanted her late husband's roll-top desk restored. When she saw the final result, tears filled her eyes. "I haven't seen it shine like this since our wedding," she whispered, running her fingers across the polished oak. She paid in cash, more than I'd made in 2 months combined. I stood in the alleyway behind the shop staring at the envelope, breathing in the cold air as reality settled in. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Meanwhile, my family hadn't called once. Not to ask if I was safe, not to see if I needed help, not even to gloat. They had written me off like bad credit, no longer useful to their performance of perfection. But I hadn't forgotten. One night, I searched for Whitney online. Her public Instagram showed her latest photo, a luxury picnic set up in our backyard with champagne flutes captioned, "When dead weight finally disappears, life tastes like rosé." The rage I thought I'd buried returned with stunning clarity. They weren't just ignoring my absence, they were celebrating it. I decided then that I wouldn't just survive, I would eclipse them. I enrolled in community college night classes, grinding for a second degree in carpentry and design while working full-time. Felix helped me secure a small student loan using his business as a reference, and I retrieved a copy of my birth certificate to get a new ID. By the second year, I had opened my own Etsy shop selling reclaimed furniture, restorations, and custom pieces. People loved it. Within months, I had clients across the state. Interior designers, real estate stagers, even TV set decorators. I went by Rachel Hart now, a name I gave myself. No one knew where I'd come from. No one needed to. I'd chosen the name Rachel as a reminder of the friend I'd lost because of my family's cruelty, and Hart for the strength I'd found in my own heart. But everything changed when a familiar name appeared in my business inbox. Martha Norris, my mother. She had no idea she was emailing me. The subject line read, "Inquiry for custom dining table. Urgent." I almost laughed. She wanted a custom piece for a real estate gala Whitney was throwing in our old backyard, a fundraiser that required a statement centerpiece. She wanted a designer with grit and authentic vision. I took the job and made sure the quote was double my usual rate. They accepted without blinking. On delivery day, I hired a driver. I didn't go, but I included a letter folded neatly under the table's glass centerpiece, a letter only they would understand, not revenge, not rage, just truth. You dragged me across the driveway like I was nothing, but I turned your driveway into my launching point. This table is the only piece of me you'll ever afford again. Our heart. The table itself was my masterpiece, etched with burn-in carvings along the underside. Silent, hidden, but readable if you looked closely enough. Dead weight floats when you're made of stone. I heard later from Felix, who had connections with the delivery service, that Whitney nearly fainted when she read it. My mother locked herself in her room during the gala and never emerged. My father stormed out of the event yelling about traitors and ingrates in front of 30 guests. It was perfect, but I wasn't done yet. 3 years after I left home, Felix came into the workshop with a strange look on his face. "Your old neighborhood is in the paper," he said, handing me the local classifieds. "Someone mentioned seeing your family name." I scanned the section he pointed to, foreclosures. There it was, 27 Birchwood Drive. Mrs. Lillian, who still kept in touch with me through Felix, confirmed it in a call that evening. She still lived 3 doors down from my parents and had witnessed their gradual financial decline after my father lost his job at the investment firm 6 months earlier. The following winter, nearly 4 years after the trash incident, I received a letter with no return address, just a cheap envelope sealed unevenly. Inside was a photo of my childhood home with a "for sale" sign. The caption said, "Foreclosure pending." Mrs. Lillian had kept her promise to let me know what happened to them, monitoring the situation through her extensive network of community friends. I stared at the worn shutters in the image, the same ones I used to paint every summer while my father shouted corrections from his lawn chair. That house had been their temple, the altar where they sacrificed me to preserve their image, and now they were losing it. I didn't smile, I didn't laugh, but something inside me felt complete. A week later, Felix sat across from me at the shop, sipping tea while I sanded down a walnut table. "You're going to help them?" he asked quietly, like he already knew the answer. "No," I said, looking up from my work. "I'm going to give them one last thing to cherish." The auction day came quickly. My business had flourished over the past 4 years, with a waiting list of clients and features in design magazines. I had saved enough to make this final statement. I didn't attend the auction, but sent someone else in my place, a young couple I'd helped months earlier. I'd restored their storm-damaged furniture for free when no one else would touch it. They just had a baby and were struggling but kind. When the gavel fell, they won. The house, my prison, was no longer in my family's name. But that wasn't the revenge. That was just the shift. 2 weeks later, I printed invitations on fine embossed cardstock. Open house celebration, a new beginning for 27 Birchwood Drive. I hand-delivered one to my parents and one to Whitney. Mrs. Lillian had discreetly provided me their new address, a small apartment on the outskirts of town where they'd moved after the foreclosure. On the day of the open house, I stood across the street as they pulled up, likely expecting a reconciliation, an apology party, or even a chance to reclaim what they'd lost. Instead, they were greeted by a handmade wooden sign on the lawn. This home was rebuilt with grace, not guilt. The young couple welcomed them with warm smiles, holding their baby. "You must be here for Rachel," the woman said, eyes soft but steady. "She gave us everything." My father's face fell. My mother blinked rapidly as if trying to wake up. Whitney turned red with confusion. I stepped out from behind the hedge. No makeup, no designer clothes, just overalls and my stained work gloves, a clipboard in hand. They froze. "Why?" my father finally barked. "You gave them the house? After everything After everything," I cut in. "I gave it to someone who would never hurt their child, who would never scream at them from the staircase, who would never drag them across the gravel just to prove they could." Whitney stepped forward. "You think this makes you better?" "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "This makes me free." She scoffed. "You could have helped us. You should have. You were our daughter." "You threw your daughter in a trash can," I replied, my voice steady. "You don't get to act shocked when she becomes recyclable." They left without another word, but not before I handed them one last thing, a wooden box, simple and polished, my final craft for them. Inside was a crushed soda can, an old photo of me in the trash with bloody knees that Mrs. Lillian had taken the morning I left, and a note that read, "You taught me what worthlessness looks like," so I gave it back. I never saw them again after that day. My father and mother moved to Arizona 6 months later to live with my mother's sister, their relationship permanently strained by financial ruin and public humiliation. Whitney eventually married and cut contact with them too. I learned through Mrs. Lillian, who remained my connection to that world until she passed away peacefully in her sleep last year at the age of 89. Once, maybe a year after our final confrontation, Whitney emailed me under a different name asking for a commission. I recognized her writing style immediately from the way she structured her sentences, the same patterns I'd seen in countless text messages over the years. I declined and blocked the address. The final tie was severed. Now I build custom pieces for people who know value, not just price. I use my name, my hands, my stories, not for revenge anymore, but because I survived what they tried to destroy. I made beauty from the broken wood they left behind. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles. Zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.